Working okay and everyone can see all right. To start, thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for showing up, taking some time out of your day just to listen to me talk about boats for a little while. I'll try to keep this within a reasonable time frame, and I'm happy to stick around afterwards to answer any questions or talk as much as you guys would like. So again, thank you to the Visitor Center, to Michelle, everybody at the Army Corps of Engineers that's made this possible. It really is an honor. It's a privilege to be here. It's a very humbling experience. So like Michelle said, I've been doing this. I've been captain on the Gott since 2011, and I'll just spend a little bit of time talking about my career and some of my experiences throughout over the past 25 years now. Yeah, to start out, I always had a little bit of an interest in ships and the Great Lakes. I was born and raised in Grand Rapids, Michigan, grew up here. Was fortunate that we had some really amazing parents that took us on a lot of family vacations in the summertime. And in 6th grade, I went through a school here in Grand Rapids called John Ball Zoo School. And one of the teachers there used to have us sing songs all the time, and one of those songs was The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. So going back to the mid-90s here, early 90s, I guess, didn't really know anything about that, what that meant, what it was about. So convinced my mom to take me to the library one day and found a book about the Edmund Fitzgerald and read that. And one of the crew members that was on board that night that lost his life was a cadet at Great Lakes Maritime Academy in Traverse City. Same thing, didn't really know anything about the academy. So as I progressed through high school, started looking at my options after high school, and started to research a little bit about the academy. One of those family vacations, my parents took us across Lake Michigan on the car ferry Badger. And I don't know how he did it, but somehow my dad learned that the third mate on board was a recent graduate of Great Lakes Maritime Academy, and somehow met her and was able to convince her to spend a little bit of her time off watch talking to me and showing me around the boat a little bit. So that just did, continue to pique my interest. Several vacations up to Sault Ste. Marie in the summertime to watch the boats go through. I graduated high school in 96 and was accepted into Great Lakes Maritime Academy. At the time, it was only a 3-year school. It's 4 years now. They get a traditional bachelor's degree. Back then, in the late 90s, it was a 3-year school. It came out with an associate's degree. But more important to that, in relation to the maritime industry, is I graduated with a third mate's license and pilotage on the Great Lakes. So graduated in 99 from Great Lakes Maritime Academy, and my first job was with Great Lakes Fleet on the John G. Munson, and I've been with the fleet ever since then. I've sailed on just about every boat that we have in the fleet, some of them that aren't in the fleet anymore. I've been captain on the Gott since 2011. That process, as you spend some time with a company and gain some experience and kind of work your way up through the ranks, eventually when you write a captain's license, and then the company basically picks and chooses who they want to promote through their training program. And I was fortunate enough to be chosen to go through that, and observed. They call it observing captain, where you basically sail on board the ship with the regular captain of the ship, and they train you how to handle the boat, some of the other details of the position. I did that for a couple of years on several ships throughout the fleet, and then once the company determines that you have enough experience and that you've proven that you're capable of handling the job, they offer you a relief captain's job, which is essentially when the regular captain gets off on vacation, you take over for 30 days or however long they're gone. So I did that a couple of years, and then as it's been throughout my career, it was just kind of a right place, right time when the position on the Gott opened up in 2011, and it was offered to me, and I've been there ever since. So it's been a good company to work for. It's been a great career. Just a little bit about the ships. There really isn't a typical Great Lakes ship. The crew size varies anywhere from 12 to 25. Just depends on the type of ship it is, the type of cargo that it's involved in. On the Gott, we typically have 20. Sometimes we'll have 21. The last couple of years, the entire industry's been going through kind of a shortage of personnel, and we've operated with short 4 or 5 people at certain times. So the crew's broken up into 3 departments: deck, engine, and galley. Deck department is responsible for all the navigation, the cargo operations, the engine room. Other than operating the main propulsion plant, they're usually responsible for most of the maintenance on board. And then the galley department, on most of the Great Lakes fleet vessels, it's 2. We have a steward and a second cook, and they are responsible for the galley areas and producing the meals for the crew 3 times a day. On the Great Lakes, several different kinds of ships, primarily the self-unloaders, which are involved in the bulk material trade: the iron ore, the coal, the stone, the salt. Some of the Canadian fleets have what are they called, gearless or straight deck ships that are involved in some of the bulk materials trade, but also grain. And then what we've seen starting just before COVID, but much more now so that the country's come out of that, is the cruise industry has become a fairly significant player on the lakes. And it seems like every year we see more and more cruise ships that are coming on. And then, of course, you have the ferries as well. You have the Car Ferry Badger and the Lake Express, and then several smaller ferries that operate within the river systems, just transiting from the U.S. to Canada. And then, of course, you have the saltwater visitors, also the salties that come in. So this map it's a little dated. This is from the World War II era, but it's I think it's still fairly accurate, fairly important. It shows the general trade patterns on the Great Lakes. The iron ore from the far western side of Lake Superior down to the major steel mills in southern Lake Michigan and down into onto Lake Erie. There is some trade that goes out, some of the iron ore trade that goes out through the Welland Canal and out through the Seaway. I can talk a little bit about that. We were involved in some transload operations a few years ago. And then the coal trade, which is starting to dry up significantly. The power plant coal, as the utilities have transitioned away from coal as a generating resource, a lot of that's going away, has been over the past 5 or 6 years, and the tonnage continues to reduce year after year. Stone, a lot of stone goes up towards the iron ore mines in Minnesota and Wisconsin. It's part of the production process for making taconite pellets, and then a lot of construction stone also. Our fleet was involved in hauling a lot of stone the last few years down to Detroit for the construction of the new International Gordie Howe Bridge down in southern Detroit. And you see some salt trade as well that comes out of Detroit, Cleveland, Goderich in Ontario. Ships a tremendous amount of salt throughout the year. So this kind of the whole presentation generated by the Soo Locks, and I'm not going to go into a lot of the details. There's people with the Corps of Engineers and probably Michelle as well that can explain the finer points of the construction of the new post-sized lock much more intelligently and much better than I could. But essentially, Soo Locks extremely important, very important to the local economy in northern Michigan, very important to the Michigan economy, all of the Great Lakes states, the national economy. Again, I don't have the specifics of some of the studies, but I know that they've shown a significant closure of the Soo Locks would essentially put the national economy into a recession or depression very quickly. This really is the linchpin of the Great Lakes system, and twinning the pole lock completing that construction project it's very, very important to my industry and to everybody else that's involved in one way or another. So I don't know the exact time frame. I believe it's somewhere in the 7 to 8 year horizon now. Certainly hope that happens. During my career, it would be really nice to have two lock chambers there. Approximately 70% of the traffic that transits the Soo Locks has to use the pole lock. The MacArthur lock, the other operational lock, is just too small. So yeah, the redundancy factor, and just to help manage the traffic flow through the St. Mary's River system, it's really important to have that second chamber available. It was probably one of the highlights of my career, one of the great honors of my career, was being invited by the Corps of Engineers to participate in some of the studies with some of the other industry partners about designing the approach channels on the upper and the lower end to make sure that ships of our size can actually transit that new chamber when it is completed. So a little bit about Great Lakes Fleet. It was originally formed in 1901, combined several of the shipping companies that were already in existence on the Great Lakes. It was done so by U.S. Steel, and the entire design of the fleet was to haul the product from U.S. Steel mines to U.S. Steel plants. They had a completely integrated, vertically integrated supply chain where U.S. Steel owned the mines, they owned the product, they owned the shipping companies, they owned the railroads, they owned the steel mills. So everything was designed around U.S. Steel having complete control over that supply chain. Originally, there was over 100 ships and barges in the fleet, and if you look through the history of Great Lakes Fleet, they tended to be some of the trendsetters on the Great Lakes. They were the ones that designed and built the next generation of ships, throughout probably the first 5 or 6 decades of the 1900s. We don't necessarily have a direct tie to U.S. Steel anymore, but we still, carry on that tradition as one of the premier fleets on the Great Lakes. So as you go through the 1970s, when the 1,000-footers were being designed and introduced into the industry, and then into the 1980s, you start to see a lot of foreign competition into the steel industry in the United States, and that led to a lot of reduction. A lot of the legacy steel plants that hadn't been updated since the World War II years or even before that no longer could compete with some of these foreign entities. And then between the reduction size of the steel industry and the introduction of the 1,000-foot ore carriers, you saw this tremendous pressure put onto the Great Lakes shipping industry, where all of a sudden it took, in previous years it might have taken 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 ships. 1,000-footer could now replace all of them. So you saw a lot of ships through the 70s and the 80s either going into layup status or eventually being hauled away and scrapped. Looking at Great Lakes Fleet in the I believe it was into the late 80s and into the 90s, U.S. Steel spun off all of their transportation companies into what was basically a subsidiary of the company. They called it Transtar, and this involved the docks and a lot of the railroads, and Great Lakes Fleet, of course, was included in that. In 2001, an investment company called Blackstone purchased all of these assets, purchased the ships and the docks and some of the railroads, and essentially came in with a 5-year plan. They were pretty open and honest about it, that they were in it short term. They weren't looking to operate any of these assets for any significant period of time. They were going to get out of it what they could, and they basically stuck to that business profile. not a whole lot of investment back into the ships or any of the other infrastructure. And then you come into 2004, where CN wants to become a player, and they weren't interested in the docks, they weren't interested in the ships. What they were interested in is some of the trackage and some of the railroads, particularly in Minnesota between Duluth and Two Harbors. And that was part of the purchase deal, is that if they wanted the railroad, Blackstone would sell that to them, but they had to take everything else along with it. So now CN becomes our owner because of a clause within the Jones Act language. The ships that trade between two U.S. ports have to be built in the United States, have to be crewed by United States sailors, and have to be owned or operated by a United States company. So CN, being a Canadian railroad, could not directly operate or manage the fleet, so they contracted with a company called Keystone out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Keystone is a very old, family-owned and operated shipping company. They used to have several ships, nothing on the Great Lakes. It was always deep sea. Now they manage several government contracts for the military. They have some tankers, and they manage Great Lakes fleet. So it's been an interesting relationship having a railroad as the owning party, but having a shipping company, a true shipping company, manage the fleet is a huge benefit to all of us. So a little bit about my ship, about the Gott. She was built in 1977, 1978. She had the earliest or the latest maiden voyage on the Great Lakes, however you want to look at it, in February of 1978. Anybody who remembers, that was the year I was born, was 78. I've heard fond stories of the wonderful winter that we experienced here in the Great Lakes region. Pretty significant winter system there in 78. So the lakes were essentially frozen over completely because of some labor issues where she was built in the shipyard in Sturgeon Bay. U.S. Steel actually took the ship down to Milwaukee to finish the completion and the fit out process. And she sailed under direct escort by the old Coast Guard cutter Mackinac from Milwaukee all the way up through the St. Mary's River, all the way over to Two Harbors. This was right during the period when U.S. Steel was attempting year-round navigation on the Great Lakes, and just through sheer dumb luck, they just picked the wrong couple winters to try to do it. They were successful at great expense. When the Gott reached Two Harbors, the Mackinac had actually suffered some damage as well on the transit across Lake Superior. But when they pulled into the dock, they found they were missing a rudder. They'd collapsed one of the ballast tank bulkheads, and they'd caused some significant damage to the bow of the ship. So she basically sat in Two Harbors for a month while they put her back together. In the late 1990s, U.S. Steel, if you ever look at an overhead view, if you ever go to Google Maps and look at the dock in Gary, the dock it's due north and south. It's a mile-long slip, and the extreme northern end and southern end of the dock, that's where they stockpile the majority of their cargo for the wintertime months when the ships don't run. And they were having an issue that all of the self-unloaders at the time they couldn't place enough cargo in those two areas. They couldn't reach specific areas of the dock. So in 96, the Gott went back to Sturgeon Bay and had the 280-foot long deck boom put on it. Originally, she was built with a 52-foot long shuttle boom that just ran transversely over the side. The Spear still has the same kind of setup. The trick with those is you have to have a shoreside hopper to unload into. So you're dependent on the dock equipment to be able to put the cargo where they want it. And the dock wasn't set up in Gary to do that. So the 280-foot boom, it's anywhere from 20 to 30 feet longer than any of the other booms on the Great Lakes, and it enables the ship to put cargo where nobody else can. Now, it was specifically designed for the dock in Gary for U.S. Steel, but what we found over the years is that it gives us some opportunities with other customers as well. So we've basically hauled to just about any port on the Great Lakes that's big enough to accommodate the ship. In starting into like 2008, 2009, 2010, the ship was originally built with two V16 Enterprise diesel engines, and the engines were starting to show their age. They were starting to get some high hours on them, and what the fleet was experiencing is they couldn't source parts for them anymore. The expertise to deal with repairs and keep the engines operating, they were having trouble finding people that could do that. And so the decision essentially became whether the ship had a future or not. And if the fleet wanted to continue to operate the boat, they had to do something. They had to replace the engines. So I don't know the entire details of the process, but they settled on MAK. The engines that were ordered, they're inline 8 cylinders. Each one produces just under 10,000 horsepower. They're the largest engines. Gives her the most horsepower of any commercial ship on the Great Lakes. There are some other MAK engines in operation now on the lakes, but none of them that are this size that have this kind of rated horsepower. So unlike a lot of our competitors, the Gott and the Spear, they were designed and built by U.S. Steel to service their industry. So we don't have the ability to carry other cargoes like some of the other 1,000-footers do. If you look at a cross-section of the Gott or the Spear as compared to any of the other 1,000-footers on the Great Lakes, our cargo holds are significantly smaller, have much less cubic capacity, but this is because the ships were just designed to carry iron ore. We weren't intended to be able to switch to coal or stone or any other product that the company might come up with. They were designed to carry taconite pellets from U.S. Steel docks to U.S. Steel docks. At the same time that the Gott and the Spear were being designed and built, the dock in Two Harbors was going through the same process. And the picture here, this is the ship backing away from the loading dock in Two Harbors, the number 2 dock. This is where we primarily load, and the dock it's basically designed to accommodate the Gott and the Spear. So we have about half as many cargo hatches as any of our competitors do. But at this particular dock, each one of the loading rigs lines up with one of our cargo hatches. So what that gives us is the ability to load the ship a little faster than any of the other ships can, because we match up right with the dock facility itself. So essentially, this term velocity that I highlighted there, that's in reference to a gentleman that used to work in our traffic department. That was one of his favorite words. Pairing the ship with this dock facility, with the large engines and the long boom, it essentially means that we can carry the cargo to any other dock that any of our competitors can do, but we can get there faster and we can put it in places where nobody else can. So it essentially makes the ship kind of the preeminent iron ore hauler on the Great Lakes. We can't do it all, which I've said several times, but what we do it just as well or better than anybody else ever has or can. So some of the neat things that we've been able to do are, because we're dedicated to one specific cargo, we're not, whereas the Spear's limited because of their shuttle boom, either to the hopper in Gary, Indiana, or the hopper in Conneaut, Ohio. The long boom on the Gott allows us to do some other things. the top left picture there, that was part of the transfer program that I talked a little bit about earlier, where we were loading the cargo on the far west side of Lake Superior, hauling it down to Conneaut, Ohio. We would transfer that into these smaller Seaway-sized ships. They would take it out the Seaway to Quebec City, where it would then be transferred onto large ocean-going bulkers and hauled overseas. And this was the most efficient way of handling the cargo through the Great Lakes system and getting it out onto the Atlantic Ocean. We've also been involved in some other transfers. The top right picture there is between us and the American Spirit one summer on Lake Superior, where they'd completed their loading operations and they had to get into a dock in Duluth Harbor, and they were simply loaded too deep to do that. So we parked out on Lake Superior, and they transferred, I want to say it was about 7,000 or 8,000 tons of their cargo into us. And then once we were done, we went back into two harbors and completed our loading process and on our way. And then that bottom picture is, it was one of the first transfer operations that I was involved in. We were anchored on the north shore of Lake Erie off Nanticoke, Ontario. And we were transferring our cargo into a couple of the smaller Canadian flagged Seaway-sized ships, and they were taking it out. I forget exactly where they were taking it out, but we transferred it into these two ships here. You know, we had one on each side of us, and then we had a little bit left over, and we just took that into Nanticoke and unloaded it there through their hopper system. So one of the things that I really like about the company that I work for, about Great Lakes Fleet, about Keystone and CN, is that we're very aware of our surroundings, of the environment that we operate in. I've always felt that the fleet takes ownership of our operations, and when I say that, I mean the Great Lakes system as a whole. It really is a tremendous resource for all of us here in the Midwest, and I think a lot of times, we take it for granted a little bit that we have these bodies of fresh water available to us. But we really have a responsibility to all of our stakeholders, to the public, to our customers, to our competitors, to any of our vendors, to operate in a safe and an environmentally conscious manner to make sure that we protect the system as a whole. And then, of course, the government also, our regulatory agencies, the Coast Guard and ABS and Army Corps of Engineers. So a little bit about our crew. This gentleman, some of you might even recognize him, Mr. John Rice. He's been one of our permanent wheelsmen for the last several years. Absolutely fantastic, a photographer. I was going to say amateur, but he's not really an amateur. He's really, really good. But this picture was a couple years ago after our last unload on our way towards the layup dock, and we were trying to get the deck rinsed in less than ideal conditions, very cold, and we were kind of out in Lake Michigan in a gale there. But the crew, like I said, it's typically around 20. Each watch, so each mate will, first, second, and third mate will stand a 4-hour watch twice a day. So the second mate works from midnight till 4 in the morning. First mate works from 4 in the morning till 8, and then the third mate works from 8 in the morning till noon, and then they just start all over again. So each watch will have 2 ABs on it, a wheelsman and a watchman, and then we have a bosun and a deckhand who basically work on call whenever we need them, whether that's for cargo operations or mooring the ship at the dock or for transiting the Soo Locks. And then the captain, my position is basically on call 24 hours a day when you're on board. So through the river systems, I'm always up in the pilot house for that. Through some of the more confined waters, the Straits of Mackinac or the west end of Lake Erie, it really depends on the experience of the mate that's on watch, whether I'm up in the pilot house or maybe just sitting in my room, kind of keeping an eye on things. So yeah, it's once you step on board the ship, you're basically on call until you get back off. And the engine room's the same way. There's a licensed engineer, first, second, and third assistant that's always on watch down in the engine room. They follow the same watch schedule that the deck crew does. And then the chief is essentially on call 24/7 whenever he's needed down in the engine room. If we're maneuvering in or out of port or through the river systems, he's somewhere down in the engine room. He's always available in case something goes wrong. And then the steward and the second cook work. It depends a lot on the individuals. But they typically work through the day, start at 5 or 6 in the morning, and then not straight through, but they work a significant period there straight through until supper time. Cargo operations. So the ship has what's called a loop system. So there is one conveyor belt that runs underneath the cargo hold all the way from the bow back to the stern. And then when it gets back to the stern, it runs through a loop system, which is essentially two cargo belts that pinch the cargo together and raise it up from the unloading tunnel up onto the deck where it's dumped on the boom. And then we can elevate and swing the boom up to 90 degrees over the side to place the cargo wherever the dock wants it to. Underneath the cargo hold, so there's 5 cargo holds on the boat. Underneath, there's a series of gates, excuse me, 72 gates. They're manually operated. So when we're unloading the ship, there's 2 crew members that go down into the cargo tunnel, and they will open and close the gates. And we do this in a predetermined sequence, usually in 3 or 4 gates sequences. And that's done because the ship is so long and flexible that you can't just start at one end or start in the middle. You have to unload certain areas of the ship in a predetermined pattern, and then as you're unloading the cargo at the same time, we're pumping ballast water back in. So the hull of the ship is going to flex and bend a little bit throughout this entire process, but the idea is to minimize that through unloading through a sequence and then pumping in ballast at the same time. What's unique about the Gott and the Spear, I believe we're the only 2 ships on the Great Lakes that have a system like this. That center picture is our ballasting system, ballast computer there. So the mate on watch that's overseeing the unloading operation will stay up in the pilot house, whereas most of the other ships, the mate will be either out on the boom or out on deck, and they pump the ballast from the engine room. We control everything from the pilot house. So we have all of the controls to monitor how much cargo is going off the ship, what kind of rate we're unloading at, and then at the same time, the mate can control where they're pumping the ballast water into the boat. So it gives us a lot of flexibility, a lot of immediate control over the entire program. We can adjust a little bit on the fly if we have to. And then it also gives the mate the ability to change up the sequence a little bit if something isn't quite going the way that they want it to, or if we've at a few times in the past we've hauled split cargoes where you have more than one product on board segregated into different cargo holds, and it gives us a lot of flexibility to monitor the entire ship and what's going on through that entire unloading process. So I had quite a while ago, when I was still working my way up through the ranks as a junior mate, I asked a captain one time just to explain to me a little bit about ship handling and how he gets the boat into the dock, and that was his response as well. You just point it at the dock, but you don't actually run into anything. So the controls on the ship, 2 engines, two propellers, and then a 1500 horsepower bow thruster. And I can control that from 3 different stations up in the pilot house, either all the way out in either bridge wing or right in the center of the pilot house there. And then we also use that screen on the right it's a screenshot of our electronic chart system. And what that is it's basically a computerized version of the paper navigational charts that we use, and then it takes our AIS, our GPS position, and it basically creates that icon of the ship, which shows us on the chart where we are in relation to the harbor or the river or even out on the lake. So it gives us a lot of information. Shows us the speed of the ship, the rate that the boat's turning, gives us the environmental conditions so that you can see what the wind is like at that particular time. So we have a tremendous amount of information that's available to us to handle the boat and make it go where we want it to go. At the same time, the rest of the crew is out on deck. So we'll have a mate out on deck that's kind of my eyes and ears out there, that's relaying over walkie-talkie how close we are to the dock or to whatever physical landmark that I'm watching. And then up in the pilot house, we'll have another mate and a wheelsman up there as well to help me out with phone calls or the radio, or if I need any assistance up in the pilot house from anybody. So we talk a lot about horsepower. You know, the crew on board, the fleet. You know, we're all very proud of the ship, and you know, they make it well known that when they repowered her, they made sure to pick engines that would produce the kind of horsepower that the fleet wanted. On the Great Lakes, yeah, two 10,000 horsepower main engines. You know, that's pretty big news for us. In the grand scheme of things, in the merchant marine or in the naval world throughout history, that's pretty small potatoes. You know, when you compare what we have compared to some of the large nuclear-powered aircraft carriers or some of the large ocean liners, even some of the container ships that are sailing now, it's not really much of a comparison, really. So a lot of that has to do with the work that the ship is designed to do. You know, our voyages are 3, maybe 4 days. You know, a round trip might be 7 days total from 2 harbors down to Gary and then back up to 2 harbors. You know, around 6 days. But when you're transiting across the Pacific Ocean, yeah, you know, that extra speed, it's a big benefit to the ship. So there's without getting into too much technical jargon there's a term called block coefficient, which is essentially how close the shape of the hull is to a perfect rectangle. A ship like the Gott, like most of the 1,000-footers on the Great Lakes, very high block coefficient. It's designed to maximize the cargo carrying capacity of the ship. When you start to look at some of the naval ships or the ocean liners or these big container ships, they might have a slightly smaller block coefficient. Much finer lines to the hull enables them a lot more speed. And again, when you're transiting across the oceans or around the world, every little bit helps. When you talk about horsepower in relation to ship speed, it's an exponential relationship. So for every additional knot of speed that you want, it's not like if you add 1,000 horsepower and you go from 5 knots to 6. Well, in order to go from 6 knots to 7, you might need 1,500 or 2,000 additional horsepower. So that top picture there, that's the ocean liner SS United States. It was the most powerful commercial ship ever built, as far as I know. And her cruising speed was around 30 knots. Her max speed was a little over 35 knots. But in order to gain that additional 5 knots of speed, they essentially had to double her horsepower. So it went from around 120,000 horsepower, I want to say, to produce the 30 knots to over 240,000 to produce that 35 knots. Just a little bit about weather. Obviously, anybody in the Midwest and certainly in Michigan through the last 3 or 4 months knows a lot about weather. It's certainly becoming more variable. It's you know, we definitely didn't have the winter that we traditionally have around here. There's not going to be any ice on the lakes that's going to really impact anybody here at Fit Out. But the wind, these dramatic wind events that we've been experiencing for the past, really since September, October of last fall, it's definitely has an impact on our operations. So each harbor has its own unique characteristics. Some harbors, like in Gary, a north wind in Gary is terrible. You end up with it basically turns the harbor into a large bathtub, where the boat's surging back and forth. But then you go to a port like Two Harbors, and a north wind doesn't really affect it too much. And the same is true for each lake. Lake Michigan, a north or a south wind on Lake Michigan is going to be a significant factor. Whereas on Lake Superior, you can hide out from a north or a south wind by simply running the shoreline. East or west wind, it's exactly the opposite. Lake Superior, there's not really any place to hide from an east or a west wind. On Lake Michigan, you can just run the shoreline and stay out of it. So we use a lot of different tools for weather forecasting and for voyage planning. NOAA has some really great people that work there that produce some fantastic products. After the El Faro, which was the last large U.S. flag commercial ship that sank down in the Gulf of Mexico in 2006, there's been a renewed focus and a lot of new tools that have been produced to help the merchant mariners out, provide us with accurate weather forecasting, and give us as much prior notice as they possibly can. So I want to let me pause this here real quick. I have a couple videos here to start out with. This one is, and I think I actually say this here at some point in the video, but this is Lake Superior in 2007, I think it was.
Yeah, I'm wondering if we should have, maybe do a video call with her to discuss what's going on.
Somebody, I think, has their mic on there.
There might need to be changed, and
I don't know. I can hear somebody talking. But anyways, I'll play the video here. I'll see if I can get, I was having trouble with the sound earlier, but I'll see if it can go here. Main deck of the Roger Blau, November 27th, 2007, 1300. So it's certainly not conditions that are anything overly significant. It's not something that we see every day, but that's what Lake Superior looks like some days. And then this one here, this was just north of northwest of Whitefish Point in 2015. This was our first trip upbound. This is the new Coast Guard cutter Mackinac. The Roger Blau is actually behind us, and if you look right behind the Mackinac right here, you can see the John G. Munson is working with, I believe it's one of the 240 Coast Guard icebreakers trying to get into this pack of ice. And essentially what had happened is the wind had been blowing out of the northwest for fairly significantly for a few days. So it had taken all of the ice on Lake Superior and packed it into right around Whitefish Point. And it wasn't tremendously thick, but there was so much pressure on it that we couldn't get through it. So the Mackinac worked with us for 2 days, I believe, until they finally suffered a propulsion casualty. And us and the Blau, we had to sit there and wait until the weather, essentially till the wind shifted a little bit and relieved some of the pressure. So this was, we were essentially stuck here, and the Mackinac is trying to break a relief track to get us moving. So certainly we're not going to experience anything like that here in another week or 10 days or 2 weeks when we fit out. This picture was this was our first trip in March of 2022. We were coming downbound, that's the spear behind us, and basically ran into the same kinds of conditions. Just very, very dense, thickly packed ice around Whitefish Point, and working with the spear, we got a couple miles into the ice pack and then essentially had to wait until the Mackinac came and led the two of us down into the St. Mary's River. But winter operations and ice breaking involves, the U.S. and the Canadian Coast Guard work together to station their assets wherever they're going to be most desperately needed. In worst case scenarios, you get into convoy operations, where they'll split us up into 5 to 10 ship convoys, whether to get us, through the Straits of Mackinac or in worst case situations across Lake Superior or up Lake Michigan. A lot of it deals with, when you get into those kinds of situations, a lot of it deals with voyage planning, where you're using satellite pictures or ice forecasts or ice reports of where the worst of the ice is, and you're trying to detour around it. Typically, the worst parts of the ice season are in the rivers. Most of our ships within Great Lakes Fleet, they were built and designed for these kinds of conditions. So typically when we're out on the lake, once we're out of the river systems and we have the room to maneuver and plot a course around some of the worst conditions, we typically do pretty good when we're on our own, unless it's really, really significantly bad. It's the river systems when you're trying to maneuver the ship through some pretty tight turns and channels. That's where the icebreakers really do help us out the most. And maneuvering within harbors when we're trying to get in and out of the docks. There's a lot of commercial operators, tugboat operators in Duluth and two harbors in Superior, and in some of the smaller ports as well that can lend assistance when we need it. So I've never been through an earthquake before. I really have no desire to ever do so, but that's probably the closest explanation I could give to what it's like being on board the ship when you're operating in these kinds of conditions. This video is from April of 2015. This is one of our first downbound trips, And you can see right in front of the ship that there is a track where an icebreaker went through before we got down there. The problem is even the larger icebreakers have a beam of 50 or 60 feet, so you're essentially shoving a cork into a bottle where you're taking a 105-foot beam ship and trying to force it through this track that an icebreaker made. So memory serves, this is 9 years ago. I want to say this ice is probably 2 or 3 feet thick, and essentially what you're going to hear is everything in the pilot house is shaking and vibrating. So you've got the engines are wound up to full power. The ship's doing everything it can, probably making 5 or 6 knots, through this area when usually we'd be up closer to 14. And she's basically just fighting her way through it. And you can see the track right in front of us, how it curves off to the left. Well, the ship can't really maneuver in these conditions. You basically just put the rudders midship and let her bounce through the ice and find her own way. And you'll see that fairly dramatically here as the bow kind of pinballs off the harder sides of the track on each side. It kind of bounces back and forth. So operating in these kinds of conditions, it's fun for maybe an hour or two, and then after that, you can't hear anything. You can't have a normal conversation. If you want to talk to people, you basically have to get right in their face and scream and holler at them because it's so loud. Everything that isn't securely fastened down is fallen. The coffee pot probably vibrated off the table and broke a couple hours ago, and pictures have fallen off the walls, and anybody's who doesn't have their TV secured, the TV probably fell and broke. So it's not a real pleasant experience. It's definitely something to see and do once in a career, but any enjoyment that you get out of it, any fun you get out of it, it goes away pretty quick. It's not a very enjoyable time on board. Nobody's getting any sleep in those kinds of conditions. This is from this next video is upbound in Whitefish Bay in 2015. This was us and the Blau made the first trip. We went up, loaded up in 2 harbors, went back down to Gary, unloaded, and now we were coming up. And the first trip, we were the only 2 ships that were operating on Lake Superior. Well, by the time that we got back up to the Soo Locks and went up through the St. Mary's River, everybody else had fit out and kind of joined the party. So this is the Canadian Coast Guard cutter Pierre Rison that they'd called in from the East Coast. The American and the Canadian Coast Guards just needed some more assets in the area. So these guys are, this is a pretty significantly sized icebreaker, a lot of horsepower. These people spend most of their time up in Hudson Bay and up in the Arctic. I mean, these are real professionals. They have a very capable ship. They really know what they're doing. And as bad as the conditions were for us here on the Great Lakes, this was just kind of a party for them. So when they were coming up to take over the head of this convoy that was going to start across Lake Superior, when we were talking to them on the radio, you could hear they had their stereo blaring in the background, and when they came past us here doing about 14 knots, a couple hundred feet off our starboard side, as you'll see, and they were up in the pilot house dancing and tooting the horn, and they were having a pretty good time. This was just kind of a little Great Lakes tour and vacation for them. So you could kind of see some of those plates of ice alongside of their hull that got turned up as he went by. It's probably close to 3 feet solid thick, and they went through that without barely even slowing down. And then you can see off in front of us, we're at the back of the pack here. Now I forget how many ships there were stationed in Whitefish Bay at that point. I want to say around 15. And between the Radisson and the Samuel Risley, they got us all moving later that afternoon and took us all across Lake Superior. So this last video, this is in the St. Mary's River. This is the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Bristol Bay. And this particular section of the river that we're in here, the channel, it's a split channel, and only the 300-foot section of the channel where the ship is sitting is deep enough for us. So whereas the Coast Guard cutter can operate on the shallow side, we have to stay on the deep side. And that's basically what happened here is we couldn't force our way through the narrow track that the cutter was making for us. So they had to stop and come down. And he's already run down our starboard side and now turned around, and he's going to run back up. And you can actually see it where these smaller cutters have the most effect is when they are able to get up to higher speed, their wake will actually start to break up the ice more so than just the ship running through. And then these smaller 140s, they also have a bubbler system that you can see as he goes past us, where they're pumping high pressure air out through the hull that helps to lubricate their hull to make it through some of the ice a little bit more efficiently. Whoops, sorry. Let me go back and redo that one. So these pictures are off the Roger Blau. I forget what year this was, but we basically lost the rudder coming down through the St. Mary's River. And the one on the right there, that's the Edgar B. Spear. Both ships were fully loaded, and in order to get into the dry dock in Sturgeon Bay to have a new rudder put on, we had to get down to Gary, Indiana, and unload the ship. So the Spear came alongside, we tied up to them, and they essentially towed us down to Gary. And then when we got down there, a couple tugboats came out and took us in and then towed us up to the shipyard in Sturgeon Bay. So like I said, one of the nice things about working for a shipping company, working for Keystone and CN as our partners there, we're not perfect. And the company, all of us, we fully admit that. It's some of our mistakes and accidents have been fairly well publicized. It's not something we're proud of, but what I really like about the company is we invest a lot of time and effort into diagnosing when things go wrong, what happened, not necessarily to point blame at anybody, but to learn from our mistakes, to learn from our accidents, to make sure that it doesn't happen again. Keystone, when they took over, came in, and going from Blackstone, which was not a shipping company, that they were there to run a business, and Keystone coming in, It was a completely different culture that we had to get used to, and they were very straightforward with us and said safety is their most important factor, and they stand by that. They put in the time and the effort. They're not afraid to spend the money. They're not afraid to slow things down and take a step back. Their most important goal is that everybody is safe on board the ship and that we all walk off, in at least as good a condition as when we came on board. So that's something really nice to know that you work for a company that not only says that as everybody always does, safety's number one, but they stand behind it and they're willing to put the time and the resources into that to make sure that everybody knows that that's their number one goal. So, some parts of the job, I've been doing this for this will be my 25th year now sailing. Some of it's redundant, some of it's doing the same thing day after day, and then again, there are some unique parts of the job too. It's a different view every day. Every day the ship's moving, and sure, we might have gone down through the St. Mary's River or the Detroit River or gone to Gary, the last 5 trips. But every time you go down there, it's something different. You see something different in the river that you've never noticed before. You get to experience something different. And certainly, I think most of us recognize that the view is pretty impressive most of the time. So the company has certainly invested a lot to make sure that our experience and our time on board the ships is valuable and is as tolerable as can be. For all of those, my wife and I, we have 2 young kids, and it's pretty tough saying goodbye to them all the time. But the introduction of Starlink and FaceTime, Wi-Fi calling, just a couple of years ago, you'd get 2-3 miles offshore and there was no cell signal out there. Well, now I can basically call home and tell my kids good night, every single night from anywhere on the Great Lakes. So it's the technology has really made things a lot more tolerable. It's definitely changed the nature of the job. Certainly made a lot of things easier, and it's given us a lot of other opportunities too. So that's all I had. Again, I really wanted to thank everybody for showing up and taking the time just to listen to me for a few minutes there. Really appreciate your guys' time. It's again, it's a very humbling experience to sit here. It's to me, it's just a job, and I appreciate the interest. And again, thank you, Michelle, and everybody at the Corps of Engineers and the Coast Guard and the Soo Locks and the Visitors Association. You guys you have a first-class situation up there at the Soo. So thank you for everything you do for us. And yeah, I'll be more than happy to stick around as long as anybody would like.
Okay, thanks. Can you hear me, by the way?
Yes, yep.
Okay, I've had some behind-the-scenes technical issues, so I have multiple solutions on standby, but I'm glad you can hear me. While we give people a few minutes to enter questions into the text, I'll just review the status of our visitor centers. You can see there the Lake Superior Maritime Visitor Center is on its winter hours through the 24th of March. So they're currently open Friday, Saturday, Sunday, 10 to 4:30. And then starting March 24th, it'll be every day except Wednesdays. At the Soo Locks, we're heading into our exciting part of the year. The locks are going to open early this year at 6 p.m., March 22nd. The Visitor Center Association, our cooperating association, is having a membership drive around that first ship event, and members are able to come to a special members-only reception from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. before the locks open. They'll have some special guests there and an opportunity to share ship stories and pictures and have some snacks before the locks open. We'll be dropping a link in the chat for where you can go for more information about that event if you want to participate. Also, the park will be open from 9 a.m. until 8 p.m. on the 22nd of March, so that everybody can be in there to greet the first ship when it comes in at 6 p.m. And the center will open for the season May 1st. And we do have online exhibits and information sheets. Our next program, one more plug for that, is going to be on the Duluth Superior Harbor. It's past, present, and future, and that should be a fantastic presentation about the busiest port on the Great Lakes. And with that, we will get to some questions. I had one that I wrote down, and I'm going to put you on the spot, and this is my question. And it's an unfair question, but you've worked on a lot of different ships. What are some of your favorites?
Well, I have to say the Gott will always hold a special place for me through my career. It's going back through the history of the boat, U.S. Steel really built something special there, and the company has invested the time and the money into making sure that she still operates the way that it does. All that being said, the first boat that I ever got on when I was a cadet was the Roger Blau. And I still fondly remember my parents drove me up to the Soo Locks. It was their first trip downbound after fit out, and climbing. They took us out on the supply boat Ojibwe and climbing up onto the deck of the Blau, and that was the first ship I was ever a cadet on. It was actually the first ship that I did my observing training on as a observing captain, and then that I relieved over there also for the first time as captain. So the Blau will always have a special place in my career and my personal story. So yeah, a lot of the ships that I sailed on as a cadet, several of those aren't even with us anymore. Have been scrapped and have gone away. But yeah, between the Blau and the Gott, yeah, there's a lot of good memories from both.
And then I had a follow-up, just because you have been on like the classic Lakers like the Munson, and then of course the Gott. What is kind of the difference of living and working on a Laker as opposed to one of the footers?
It's from the job perspective, river piloting navigation, it's completely different being on the forward end of the ship as compared to the aft end. And there's good and bad to both. The smaller ships handle significantly better. They have, you're dealing with a lot less mass there. So from a ship handling standpoint, they go into a lot tighter places than we do. And I think that's probably one of the nicer things about being on the classic style is, you get to experience some more places on the Great Lakes and through the region, the community. Whereas, we haul one product and we only visit a couple different ports. So yeah, there's definitely on the smaller ships, on the more traditional ones. Yeah, they certainly get to see a whole lot more than what we do.
And Sheila was asking, how often does ice damage the ships?
Well, this year I don't think it's going to be an issue. I don't think we need to worry about it. In the really significant ice seasons, when you look back to 14, 15. Yeah, we did experience a lot. The ships in our fleet, a lot of our competitors' fleets. Again, when U.S. Steel, the fleet that we have now, the ships that are still remaining, other than the Great Republic, they were built by U.S. Steel with those kinds of conditions in mind. So they have a lot more internal structure than some of our competitors do. They're designed for year-round operation. They're designed to be icebreakers to a certain extent on our own. So we did have some issues. One of the big problems that we had, it wasn't really hull damage. It was what we learned over time was the operating in the ice, breaking through the ice, was actually taking the anchors and pushing the anchors up through the anchor box and causing damage to the anchor boxes themselves. So technically, yeah, I guess that's all the regulatories counted that as hull damage. The company did as well. It wasn't really significant structural hull damage to the ship. But that was one of the things that we learned, is that in the really significant ice that we tend to lighten up so that we keep our anchors up higher out of the water, so that we're not dealing with that kind of thing. But yeah, it doesn't, it happens. All of the ships are designed, to survive in those conditions, up to a certain extent. And I think most of the boats at Great Lakes Fleet, probably more so than some of our competitors.
That's got to be a lot of force because those anchors aren't light.
No, yeah, you're talking about, several tons, getting jostled around. I've seen it before where like on the Gott, where the anchor chain comes up out of the chain locker and it runs over a windlass and then down through the hawse pipe, and there's guides that are made of they're either inch or inch and a quarter steel plate, and that guides the chain off the windlass down into the hawse pipe. And I've actually seen it where the chain has gotten flipped over those guides before, and then we've had to concoct ways to flip the chain. It's not like you just grab a hold of it and pull some slack in the chain or anything. So yeah, but at the same time, I do remember I forget which winter it was, 14 or 15, one of those really tough ice winters there, where we were operating in convoys across Lake Superior with the Coast Guard, and it had to have been 3 or 4 trips in, and the western side of the lake had significantly less ice, so the cutter would escort the convoy across to the Keweenaw Peninsula and then basically just turn the ships loose, and we'd make our way. And I remember going down to I was up in the pilot house, went down to my room. We were going across the lake, and we were doing a little over 17 miles an hour, the ship was, and got into a field of ice, and it basically took us from 17 miles an hour to a dead stop in about half a boat length and about 500 or 600 feet. And I was absolutely convinced. I ran back up to the pilot house, and it didn't look like anything. It was just some frozen ice that was floating on the surface, but obviously it was pretty tough, pretty significant, and thought, if we were ever going to damage the ship, that was the time. And she backed right out of it and took off, and we went down and inspected the forward tanks, and it scratched a little paint off. So she's built pretty tough. She's a pretty tough ship.
That's amazing. And that has to get your attention, stopping that fast.
It was a lot of noise, and it was even the first mate that was up there. I still remember him as I ran up the stairs, and he's like, I didn't think it was anything, and it didn't look like anything, but it's no matter how tough any of the ships are, Mother Nature can still teach us a lesson anytime she wants.
True. Sheila was asking, what is your personal favorite port for entertainment?
Oh boy. Well, we don't. Yeah, we've been on kind of a dedicated run the last couple of years. We had one trip last year into Cleveland, which is the first time we'd been into Cleveland in a long time, and that was pretty neat. I wish that we would go back there a little bit more often. It's I think Cleveland's a pretty amazing community, and it'd be nice to spend some time there and get an opportunity to go up and enjoy the city a little bit. Two Harbors, Minnesota, where we typically load. There's not a lot there. It's a small town, but yet it's still, everything that we need is, there's a grocery store there, there's some gas stations and restaurants and that. So it's kind of a nice community to go visit. It's actually, there's a lot that happens up there. In the summertime, they have a community band that, if you just happen to hit it at the right time, you can go up and sit in the park and listen to a concert up there. Duluth actually has a lot of, it's a really vibrant community up there. They have a lot of different restaurants and a lot of places. You can go down to Canal Park and enjoy that. So, there's not, everybody jokes about Gary. Not a lot of people get off the boat down in Gary, Indiana, but there's actually a lot of history there. There's a lot of nice architecture. If you hit it at the right time, there's a minor league baseball stadium right outside the steel mill. So, you're fairly close to Chicago too. So it's not, we joke around, we're not taking a cruise ship full of 5,000 people across the Atlantic Ocean, or going into Japan or Hawaii or anything. But yeah, there's all of the communities that we visit. There are some, each one has its unique charms. There are some neat things to do.
And Stephen just had a comment. He thanked you for helping keep the Mon Valley Works supplied with iron ore.
I saw that, Stephen. Yeah, thank you. It was good to touch base with you the other day.
And then Elizabeth, I presume this is probably based on that video you showed with the decks all covered in ice and the icicles everywhere. Do you have to do anything when there's a lot of ice on the boat?
We can generate hot water off the engines, and then we have a couple boilers that we can generate some hot water, and that's basically how we melt it off. Some of it we can use propane torches, in certain areas to clear things off. A lot of it deals with voyage planning and trying to stay out of the weather as much as we can. So yeah, it's trying to de-ice the boat. It puts the crew out in the elements, and there's obviously a lot of risk involved in that. It's not the safest environment, so we try to minimize the ice buildup as much as we possibly can. And you can't get rid of it all, but every little bit that you can keep off the ship, that's just that much less work to get rid of it then.
And then Mike and Bill had a question that I think hundreds of people have, and that is, are you going to be first ship through on the 22nd?
If it happens, that'd be great. We were last year, and again, everybody there, it's a tremendous presentation. I mean, for just doing our job, that really makes you feel pretty special. It's a neat experience. I think that's the second time I've gotten to do that in my career. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's wonderful to be able to get some people on board the ship and show them around and just talk and visit. If it happens, wonderful. I kind of doubt it. Just the way we're laid up right now, we have to wait until the spear has to go out before we do. And yeah, you never know who else is going to be, on their way up there as well. So if it happens, great. But yeah, I share the wealth also. Whoever gets the opportunity, it's really a wonderful experience to.
Well, I remember when you were first in, I think it was 2015. You were upbound, and your parents were at the visitor center, and we smuggled them on board as a surprise.
I think you guys got to ride with us into the chamber.
We did. You let us ride into the lock, and that was that really brutal winter. And getting out of the lock did not go smoothly. Because of course, what a lot of people don't realize is all of the ice in Lake Superior that ends up in Whitefish Bay eventually is going to wash out through the St. Mary's River. And so that was all waiting on the upper end of the lock.
Yeah, I think we didn't even make it out our first attempt. I think they had to lock us back down. I think we had to back out, and they had to clear the
a couple times, because it was funny. It was during the open house, and people were like, "Oh, it's moving," and they'd run out to the platform to watch, and then next thing they were coming back in. No, it's backing up again.
Yep.
But like you said, Mother Nature, she really runs the show.
Yep. No.
And Candace was asking about what it was like being on the late Roger Blau, which you kind of told us about, but also had some questions about what it was like on the Arthur M. Anderson.
I've never, the Anderson, I think, is the only boat in the fleet I've never even been on before. I think I've been on, I've never sailed on the Republic. I've been on her a couple times. I've never even been on board the Anderson before. Yeah, but no, the Blau, she's a one of a kind. And you never know. I mean, she's still sitting there, so you never know what CN and Keystone and Great Lakes Fleet will put together. So I don't have any information on it, but she's been through some rough times before. I wouldn't count her out quite yet.
Okay. Well, I hope not, because she's one of my favorites.
Absolutely.
Stephen was asking if CN is still trying to sell Great Lakes Fleet.
Not that I'm aware of. No, I know they kind of kicked the tires a couple of years ago and saw what was out there, and no, they, as far as I know, it's they're in it for the long haul with the rest of us. I certainly don't have access to the numbers, but I know they put a tremendous amount of money into the fleet again this winter. So it's yeah,
And
I don't see them going anywhere.
Sheila had a question about kind of this winter off season, and she's wondering if you take classes or other training during that off season.
So there are some training things that the company wants us to do. We do a little bit of that. I actually, when I went through Great Lakes Maritime, I mentioned that it was a 3-year program. We got an associate's degree, and a couple of years after I graduated, that was one of the things I wanted to complete. So I did in the winter times. I had to do a little bit of finagling with my schedule with our HR department, but got a little bit of extra time off, and I used the winters to finish my undergrad through Grand Valley here in Allendale in Southwest Michigan. So I did my undergrad in finance and economics through Grand Valley, and right now I'm going through a master's program with Michigan State. So, and that's yes, during the winter time, but it's a full year program. So again, part of the benefit of having Starlink and internet access now is that I can complete that program on the boat as well as off. So
I mean, it's a lot less isolated than it used to be.
absolutely, yeah, it's the technology, Starlink in particular, the internet, full-time internet access, it was a game changer. No.
And Bill had a comment that he doesn't think there are any other masters involved with a famous steam locomotive.
Yeah, a little shout out to Steam Railroading Institute in Owasso. If nobody knows the whole story, that's the Pure Marquette 1225, the locomotive there. That was the train engine that was actually used for the Polar Express, the animated movie with Tom Hanks. So I've done some volunteer work there before. Fortunately, I just haven't had much time the last couple of years. But anybody who's looking for a volunteer opportunity, yeah, Steam Railroading Institute, they're a wonderful group of people, tremendous group of people there.
And Susan, Captain Weekly's mom, says hello.
Oh, yep, that's Captain Keene. He's the relief captain between the Gott and the Spear, bounces back and forth between the two boats. She was there last year, and Captain Keene's wife made it on board too for the welcoming party.
Very cool. Angie says, "Go Lakers!" And I had a question that I had jotted down that I was just curious about. At the Soo Locks, the main cargoes that come through are taconite, coal, and stone, followed by grain. And I'm just wondering, like, what are some of the differences in handling those? Is one of them easier, or one of them dirtier, or what are some differences, or does it not really matter?
I don't have any experience with grain. Taconite pellets, iron ore, some of it depends on which mine it comes from. Some of the different grades are far dustier than others. Coal can, I don't have a lot of experience with coal, certainly nothing in the last 15 years, but yeah, coal can definitely be, it's a dirty product. Stone, not so much. So, I mean, there is some cleanup work after stone loads. And then anytime if you're on a ship where they're switching product, we make sure that we clean our cargo holds, fairly well, make sure that we get all the product off during every unload. But if you're switching between cargoes, that's when you really have to pay attention. You certainly don't want to have a load of coal and then go load limestone and go to unload it, and here's that nice bright pile of white limestone, and all of a sudden a couple chunks of coal come falling off the end of the boom on it. So yeah, Each product, yeah, that's probably the biggest thing, is just making sure that you clean the boat up after the unload, making sure that you keep the products separated. So.
And then I had another question that I actually get asked quite often in the summer, and I'm always tempted to give a smart alecky answer. Sometimes in the summer, the boats come through and they've got sprinklers running on the deck.
Mhm.
And I've always wanted to just tell people it's for the slip and slide. But could you explain why that is happening? I mean, I presume it's not recreation.
Yeah, I think the visitors probably wouldn't enjoy watching a bunch of sailors go down the slip and slide out on deck. No, so what I was talking about during the unloading, the ship's hulls, they're designed to bend and flex, and yes, that happens during the loading and the unloading during the cargo operations, but even just changes in the environment can do that as well. So if Lake Superior, even in the middle of the summertime, might get up into the mid to high 40s water temperature wise. So if the ship is sitting in water that's 45 degrees and it's a sunny day outside, even if it's 60 or 70 degrees, but the sun's shining, that sun beating on the deck will cause the steel in the deck to expand, and that cold water causes all of the steel in the hull underwater to contract. And so the ship's hull will actually begin to flex. We call that hog, where the center of the ship, where the midship section is higher up in draft and the bow and the stern sink lower into the water. So the thought behind running the sprinklers or running water out on deck is to cool the deck down so that hogging action, that flexing, doesn't happen as much. And it's not a danger in an environmentally induced hog. It's not a danger to the ship. It's not going to overstress the ship at all. But what the problem is that it actually increases the draft of the ship. So if we're loaded and we're coming down through the St. Mary's River and we're monitoring the water levels the entire time, if we loaded our whatever our company policy is for our bottom clearance going through the river, if we loaded the ship to a draft in anticipation of that bottom clearance, and we get down there and that hogging action has caused the draft at the bow and the stern to go down more, we might actually not have enough bottom clearance, enough water to get down through the river system.
And that's pretty important in the rock cut.
Yes, very much so. Yep.
And Sheila was asking, how irritating are personal drones?
I wouldn't say irritating. Probably 90% of the time, we don't even know they're there. Every once in a while, probably more so at nighttime, if they have a light on them, if they have a camera, and you'll see the light flying around the ship. Very, very infrequently do you actually notice that they're there. I remember we were loading in two harbors a couple of years ago, and it was early in the morning, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, I don't remember, but I went up to the pilot house to visit with the first mate and check on the load, and he said, I was just outside walking around, nothing was going on, and he said I could hear something, and he said then all of a sudden he looked up and there was a drone right in front of his face, just a couple feet away. So we kind of know. We know that there's some people around the Blue Water Bridge, down around Port Huron, and there's obviously people in two harbors and through the St. Mary's. Most of the time, we don't even know they're there, or if you see them, it's just kind of a passing glance. So they don't. I don't think they really bother us at all. It's the far vast majority of people are respectful of the ship and of the crew, and it's not really an intrusion at all. It's kind of the nature of the world today. Everybody has a cell phone. Whether we realize it or not, we're always on camera all the time. Somebody's, and not just on the ships, anywhere, somebody's always taping you doing something.
Very true.
Yeah.
Everyone's a broadcaster now.
Absolutely.
And we're all stars in that TV show.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, I think we have run through our questions. So I have one more slide here with just our details. This video will be posted on YouTube within a few days. It takes me a little bit of time to download it and get it edited. Again, we do have first ship happening March 22nd, 6 p.m. It's going to be a real treat to have that during daylight hours instead of the middle of the night. We're expecting to have pretty heavy traffic, even if it's not the Gott, because the water is so wide open right now, not anticipating the challenges we've had just 10 years ago. So I encourage everybody, if you can come to the visitor center this the 23rd, we'll be having our open house. There is that members event. If people are interested in joining the Soo Locks Visitor Center Association to participate in that. And I'd like to thank Captain Tim for joining us and sharing all of this. It was really interesting.
Thank you. Thank you again to everybody.
And goodbye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you, guys.